Okay, so for several weeks now, we've been looking at Psalms chapter 19, and today we are moving on to the next verse. We're starting with verse 8, but let's read all the verses together just to keep us in mind where we've been and where we're going. Psalm 19 and verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring or converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple, or making the silly or seducible wise. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true, they are righteous altogether. So today we're going to be looking at that one part in verse 8. The precepts of the Lord are right. Now, as we have been doing this study, we have been seeing that God is not just giving us information here in Psalms, but God is trying to teach us discernment. We have seen how discernment is a spiritual gift. Discernment is when wisdom and understanding intersect. Discernment is a true gift. The Greek word would be charisma, from which comes the word charismatic, like the charismatic movement. Discernment is, biblically speaking, a true charismatic gift, not in the biblical sense of the word, not in the modern usage of the word. And discernment, as we have seen, we have been learning to discern between the unholy fear of God and the holy fear of God. And the easiest way to discern is by looking at direction. The unholy fear of God takes us away from God, where the holy fear of God makes us want to draw near to God. We have looked at how to discern the difference between demonic faith and the effectual, energetic, saving faith. Remember 2 Peter, a faith of the same sort or same kind as ours. We have been looking to learn how to discern the difference between the law of sin and death and the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus. One of our verses was, "There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set us free from the law of sin and death." Can you see the difference between the two? Romans 7:12, the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. And Galatians 3:24, therefore the law has become our tutor, or literally it's the word children's driver, to lead us to Christ so that we may be justified by faith. So we've looked at all of those. We looked at the law of the Lord is perfect. What does perfect mean? What does it mean that the law of the Lord restores and converts our soul? We've looked at that. We saw how God is perfect and He makes us perfect. And we looked at the testimony of the Lord is sure. What does the word sure mean in God's vocabulary? We saw that the Hebrew word sure is also the Hebrew word for faith. Steadfast. We talked about God being an anchor for our soul, and how that the testimony of the Lord makes the silly or seducible to be wise. And what does that look like? God is sure, He makes us sure. And today we're going to start on the precepts of the Lord are right. And how that rejoices our heart. So as is the standard, or our way we do things, when we're trying to learn what God means by a certain word, we find all the places in the Bible where God uses that word, and we're trying to learn not how our society uses a word, but how God uses the word. And so, if you're interested, I have 19 pages of verses. Which is every place in the Old Testament where God uses the word that's translated right. The word right, in the Hebrew word that's translated right in English, means to be straight, or to make straight, to make right, to make pleasant, or to make prosperous. Now then, the word depravity, are you familiar with the word depravity? The word depravity is a word used by theologians to describe what God is teaching us. For example, in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The Bible tells us all are sinners. Depravity is a term theologians use to describe the fact that all are sinners. Depravity is also used in the Bible. Romans 1:28, and just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. What is depravity, or a depraved mind? The word is very simple in its meaning. It means the inability to walk in a straight line. The inability to walk in a straight line. So, I could say, I'm going to walk over here to Elise. I'm going to walk to Elise. I'm trying to walk to Elise. One of these times I'm going to make it to her. But because I'm depraved, I do not have the ability to walk in a straight line. I would like to, but I can't. Depraved would be the opposite of the statutes of the Lord are right. God's ways are straight ways. Think about, what did Jesus say? Enter at the narrow gate, for straight is the way that leads to life. Sometimes we use the term straight and narrow. He didn't follow the straight and narrow. He ended up in prison, right? That's where this idea comes from. Straight. The opposite of straight is depraved. Philippians 2, starting in verse 12, also talks about this idea. Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 12. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. Now in King James and some of the other translations where the New American has perverse, it uses the word depraved. So that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked and depraved, or crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain, nor toil in vain. The precepts, the statutes, the laws of God are straight, and God makes us straight. And here in Philippians, the Apostle Paul is using this concept, this idea, this truth of God to say to us that once God makes your way straight, you are going to stand out. You're going to stand apart, and everyone will notice when your ways are straight and you're living in the middle of a crooked and perverse or crooked and depraved generation. He said, when God makes your way straight, you will appear as lights in the world. Now, I think all of us know that we're living in the middle of a crooked and perverse or a crooked and depraved generation. And what God wants is for us, those who walk on the straight path, the narrow way, he said, you will appear as lights in the world. Jesus said, you are the light of the world. We are to be light and salt in a dark world. When the light shines into the darkness is not happy. The darkness likes darkness. Evil likes darkness because it can hide there. But when we walk the way God has called us to walk, when God, who is straight and right, makes our ways straight and right, then we appear as lights in the world. We fulfill the commandment to be the light of the world. Now then, the other meanings of this word, this Hebrew word that's translated, the precepts of the Lord is right, is to make right, to make pleasant, to make prosperous. You know, Satan has this idea, if you do what you want, your life is going to be great. You're going to be full of fun and joy, and everything's going to be super. In our two Casa cases, both of the mothers are free to do whatever they want, and they have done whatever they want. And neither of them would tell you that their life is pleasant or prosperous. Just the opposite. Okay? Now, remember, we're trying to learn how to use words the way God uses words. We live in a time when this prosperity gospel is preached, and what they're saying is not true. But that doesn't mean that God making us prosperous is not true, because it is. When God makes our way right, it also becomes pleasant, it also becomes prosperous. Remember when we were talking about sagacity? Sagacity is when we have learned to use the spiritual gifts of wisdom and understanding, knowledge, together so that we become wise. We talked about how we start learning this. And as we grow, we finally reach the level of what the Bible calls sagacity. But in the middle here, while we're growing, the Bible speaks has a special word to refer to that also, and it's very often translated to act wisely and execute well. When we act wisely and execute well, our life then, our way of following God becomes pleasant and prosperous because we are acting wisely and we are executing well. We are actually doing the things that we're supposed to be doing. It's very different to dream about it and then to really do it. And when we act wisely and execute well, we become prosperous in God's sense of the word. We can be poor and prosperous at the same time. We can be, because we're not wasting the resources that God gives us. A lot of people have more money than us, but they're not prosperous. To have a lot of debt is not prosperous. But when you have a lot of debt, you can have a lot of stuff and appear prosperous. But God is speaking not about appearances, but the reality. Okay? So, let us look at some of the verses where God uses this term right. The testimony, the precepts of the Lord are right, to see what God is trying to teach us. Deuteronomy 32, verse 4. Now, we've been talking all along that the law of the Lord is perfect because perfect is part of the nature of God. And whenever God redeems us from sin, He makes us perfect. The testimony of the Lord is sure. He makes us sure. The precepts of the Lord are right. God makes us right. And here in this one verse, we see how these things begin to connect together. Deuteronomy 32, 4. He, God, is the rock. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. The foolish man builds his house upon the sand. God is the rock. His work is perfect. That's from Psalm 19:7, the exact same word. All His ways are just. A God of faithfulness. The word faithfulness there is the same word, comes from the root word of the word that's translated sure or faith. A God of faithfulness, firmly established and without injustice, righteous and upright. The word upright is the same Hebrew word for right. Righteous and upright is He. So in one verse, describing God, we see the same three words that are used in Psalm 19, 7 through 9. God is these things. He makes us to be like Him. This is part of the process of sanctification. Now, very often, we want to limit the word sanctification to being made holy. God is holy, and He sanctifies us, and He makes us holy. This is true. But there is more to sanctification than being made just holy. He makes us right. He makes us perfect. He makes us sure. And we've spent a lot of time seeing the relationship between sure and faith. All of these are included in the process of sanctification. And as we grow in these things, then our life becomes more closely identified with the life of Christ, and our life begins to stand out in stark contrast to the lives of those who are in darkness, who are living in a perverse generation, and they become curious. What happened? How did it come about that this person is so different than I am? And the ability to see that difference, and for your life to stand out as light in a perverse generation, in a depraved generation, in a generation that lives in darkness. That light is then your testimony. We tend to want to say testimony is words that I say. I'm going to tell you my testimony of how I came to Christ. But your testimony of how you live is actually much more powerful than the words that you might say. Your life is a living testimony. This is the process. We talked about sanctification. As we grow in this, then our testimony becomes stronger and more powerful, because we are then that light in that evil, dark, and perverse generation. When the testimony of us as individuals and the testimony of a church then becomes that light to the community in which they live, then we begin to see the community change as people are drawn to Christ. We've talked about already this morning entering at the straight gate to walk on the narrow way. In the past, we've also talked about in the Old Testament how God describes this as the highway of holiness, the ancient paths, and the good paths. It's all the same thing. Now then, Deuteronomy 6:18. All right, we're going to do what's right. Two plus two is 4. That's right. Well, what does right mean when it speaks about morality? What does right mean when it speaks about the way that we live? Deuteronomy 6:18. Moses is delivering the words of God to the people, and he said, "You shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land which the Lord swore to give your fathers." So it's not a subjective right. This seems right to me. Something else may seem right to you. God defines it and limits it. Right and good in the eyes of the Lord. It's God who gets to say what is right and good, not society, not politicians, but it's God. Deuteronomy 6:18. Deuteronomy chapter 12, we see the similar idea. Deuteronomy chapter 12. I was turned to Deuteronomy 11. Deuteronomy 12. And verse 18. Now, here God is talking about worship. We've talked some about what does God call worship? What do people call worship? We have to learn to discern the difference there. Here God is talking about what He calls worship. And He's speaking about this part of worship in the Old Testament where they eat things that have been offered to God. And God makes certain rules. Deuteronomy 12, starting in verse 17. You are not allowed to eat within your gates the tithe of your grain or new oil, or new wine or oil, or the firstborn of your herd or flock, or any of your votive offerings which you vow, or your free will offerings, or the contribution of your hand. But you shall eat them before the Lord your God in the place which the Lord your God will choose. You and your son and daughter, and your male and female servants, and the Levite who is within your gates, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God in all your undertakings. So God is telling them there is a right place and a right time to eat these sacrifices, and that this is part of their worship. Now, we could say, I don't understand what would be wrong if I eat these things, say, at home. It's more comfortable to eat at home. I don't like to eat where other people are watching me. In St. Kitts and in Russia, this was a huge barrier to church fellowship, because here we would have a fellowship meal, we all come together, we all eat. They, in their culture, you do not eat where other people can see you. They were living in places where there was not enough food. And if someone asks you for some of your food, you're obligated to share. So the way you get around that is you don't let them know you have food. So you eat your food secretly. But here God is saying, no, we bring these certain times of the year, certain times of festivals, we bring the food together, we eat it together, we eat it in the right place, at the right time. We may not understand why it's right, but God says that it is. Part of faith is we agree with God in whatever He says. This is what He's talking about here. And then in verse 28, He tells the people, be careful to listen to all these words which I command you, so that it may be well with you and your sons after you forever. For you will be doing what is good and right in the sight of the Lord your God. Okay? Doing what is good and right by obeying God, in following God's directions, even in things that we don't understand. But we do it because He's God and He tells us. And God says this is good, pleasing, and right to Him, and it is a part of worship. Now, we don't do on our daily bread, it's different. We're free to do what we want to in our daily life. But in these special times of feasts, festivals, fellowship meals, we follow God's direction and teaching because it is good and right. 1 Kings 11:33. So we've looked at a couple of scriptures where it talks about doing what is good and right in the eyes of the Lord. Now we're going to see a transition. 1 Kings 11:33. God is talking about the people who have forsaken him. And he starts out in verse 33, because they have forsaken me. They have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Shemash, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the sons of Ammon, and they have not walked in my ways. They have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and observing my statutes and my ordinances as his father David did. So these people, instead of doing right and good in the eyes of the Lord, they have not done right in the eyes of God. Okay? It's a transition. There was a time when they were to do right and good. Now they have not done right or good. And now go to Proverbs 12:15. And we're going to see the completion of this cycle. Proverbs 12:15. The wicked man, yes, that's right. 12:15. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes. Those who do right and good in the eyes of the Lord, those that have not done right in the eyes of God, and now they don't even consider God at all, it's just right in his own eyes. See how they get further away from God with each one of those steps. Now then, the word that's used there in verse 15, the way of a fool. The fool is that silly and seducible one that we talked about in Psalms 19:7. This man is silly, he's been seduced, and now he thinks right is that he gets to determine what is right for himself. And being able, when society, the members of society believe that I have the right to choose what's right for me, God calls that an evil and perverse, an evil and depraved generation. And it's a very good description of the society in which we live, where everyone does right in his own eyes. The good news is that God tells us that those who walk in the narrow way, those who walk in the straight way, shines as light, a bright light in that darkness. And as we've read as we've been studying, the testimony of the Lord is sure, making the silly or seducible wise. God has a cure for these people. Once we learn it, we can teach them. And the same power of God that changed us is then able to change them. A person does not have to stay in this foolish condition where they do what is right in their own eyes. God does have an answer. And in Proverbs 14:12, God takes this one step further, and then we see the completion of the thought. Proverbs 14:12, there is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. It seems right. But the end of it is death. The 4 stages. Doing what's right and good in the eyes of the Lord. Not doing what's right and good in the eyes of the Lord. Right no longer has anything to do with God. It's only what I think. And there is that way that seems right. But the end is death. Okay? God's answer is return back to God's ways. Okay? 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel comes before the Kings. 1 and 2 Samuel, then 1 and 2 Kings. 1 Samuel chapter 12. Starting in verse 23 and verse 24. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. But I will instruct you in the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart. For consider what great things he has done for you. Okay? Very simple verse. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. But I will instruct you in the good and the right way. Now, let's imagine that in 2000, when this church started, this church said, we're only going to hire pastors who are faithful to pray for us, and men who will be careful and will only instruct us in the good and right way. Do you think this church would be in a different place today than where it is? Of course. Unfortunately, this is not what most churches are looking for when they look for a pastor. But it should be. Now, if it turns out that it's God's will for this church to close, you're going to have to go find a different place to worship. What are we going to look for if we have to look for a new pastor, a new church where we're going to belong. I would look for these things. And if there wasn't one here in Coleman, then I would start driving and looking for a pastor. How far do I have to go before I can find a man who will pray for me and who will only instruct me and teach me in the good and right way? Okay, very important. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you, but I will instruct you in the good and right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. Okay. You know, we have talked about in 2 Corinthians, the requirement, 2 Corinthians 5:11. Therefore, knowing the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. That's King James Version. Men who know the terror or fear of the Lord do this. If you go back in history of Baptist churches, this is one of the things that all churches looked at before they called a man to be a pastor. Does he know and can he teach the terror or fear of the Lord? As we have lost that perspective, then we have opened the door to allow all kinds of men into our pulpit. God hasn't changed his mind about this requirement, even though modern churches have changed their mind. Look at Psalms 34:11. This is King David before he has been anointed as king, but he's not yet serving as king. It's in a time of great distress in David's life when he has had to run away before Abimelech. When he's had to run away from Saul, Saul's tried to kill him. He pretends to be a madman before King Abimelech, and he goes and lives in a cave. And in the cave, God sends him 400 men who are in distress and debt and discontented. And what does David do? First of all, in Psalm 34:11, he says, "Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord, which is the good and the right way." Verse 7, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fears him and rescues them. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his saints, for to those who fear him there is no want." These good and right ways produce prosperity, not prosperity like prosperity gospel preaches, but prosperity the way God teaches it. Now, I said that the word that's translated in Psalm 19, right, means straight. What is the opposite in God's vocabulary of straight? Well, we could say crooked, and that would be true, but even more true is the word twisted. Twisted. We saw that in demonic faith, The demons believe every word that God says. They know it's true. But when the demons interact with humans, what do they do to the truth? Do they not twist it? Did God really say you can't eat of any tree? God's so mean? You can't eat any tree? You can't have any fun? They twist it. And the way that you fix twisted truth is you go back to the straight, the narrow, and the good ways. Devious men walk on crooked paths. It seems right, but it produces death. The upright walks straight and narrow paths, and it produces life. So Psalms 25, starting in verse 12. Who is the man who fears the Lord? God will instruct him in the way he should choose. His soul will abide in prosperity, and his descendants will inherit the land. The secret of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he will make them to know his covenant. God makes them to know his covenant. He reveals to them his secrets. The same is true about those whose way is right. God reveals to them his secrets. The secret of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he will make them to know his covenant. You see the word covenant there? This word covenant is a Hebrew word that's used to describe the process of making a covenant. And in this process, you take the animal that you're going to sacrifice and you divide it into two parts. Now, I'm not an artist, but imagine this is a cow, and he's been cut in two parts. That's the first step of making the covenant. The second part of the covenant is you walk through the two pieces. See that? That's just a word picture that is used in Hebrew to describe the covenant, what it is to make a covenant. The secret of the Lord is for those who fear him. God reveals his secrets to two people, those who walk in the right way and those who fear God. And those who fear him and those who walk in this right way, God will renew his covenant to them. Remember a couple of weeks ago on Wednesday night, we talked about Genesis 15. And the significance of Genesis 15 in our study: the testimony of the Lord is sure. God uses that word sure as the same word for faith. Abraham believed God, and God credited it to him as righteousness. And then God put upon Abram a very specific kind of the fear of the Lord. In Hebrew it's called Ema. It's a very powerful, strong kind of the fear of the Lord. Then God told Abraham to take these animals and to cut them in two. And Abraham obeyed because that was right. And then God passed through these animals that had been cut in two, and God made a covenant with Abraham. We talked about that on a Wednesday night, remember? This is everything that we've been talking about for the past few weeks, making a complete circle. The law of the Lord is perfect, restores or converts the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure. Remember, sure and faith are the same word in God's vocabulary. Making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right. God reveals his secrets to those who are in the right way. God reveals his secrets to those who fear God. Fearing God is one of the right ways. We see all of this coming full circle in the life of Abraham. God told him, leave your people, go to a place. He obeyed. It was right to God. It didn't necessarily seem right to Abraham. It wasn't easy, but he obeyed. God gave Abraham faith. God said, cut the animals. He cut the animals. God put this heavy fear of God on Abraham. He didn't run away. He stayed, even though he was tempted to run away. He cut the animals. He obeyed. God made a covenant. It's what God wants to do with us also. The precepts of the Lord are right. Not right in our eyes, right in God's eyes. When we obey them, when we learn them, the prophet said, I will not cease to pray for you, and I will not cease to instruct you in the good and the right way. When we follow God's methods, he straightens out those things that are twisted. There's a lot in modern Christianity, particularly in the times in which we live, that has been twisted. They've taken words that God uses in a specific way and twisted the way that their meaning so that they can use it for their own end. Prosperity gospel. Yes, if we walk in God's ways, we are going to be prosperous, but not in the way that they're talking about. They have twisted it and made it something it's not. Yes, there are charismatic gifts. But it's charismatic in the way God says it, not in the way they have twisted it. And God says, God's way is right, which in God's vocabulary, right also means straight, untwisted. He makes straight those who are depraved, unable to walk a straight line. He makes it where they can. And when we start in this way of returning to God's ways, which are right, part of that process is then we untwist what the devil has twisted, not only in our own life, but in the life of our churches, so that we once again return to that ancient way, that narrow way, the good way, the way that leads to life. Because there is a way that seems right, but it leads to death.